Welcome to a place where love is not polished or perfect, but raw, forbidden, and unforgettable, where a single glance can carry the weight of danger and longing, where innocent closeness transforms into stolen touches, secret glances, and a fire that grows stronger with every heartbeat. Here, restraint shatters in the quiet of the night, giving way to passion that is both tender and consuming, a love that claims the body and soul at once. And beyond the rules, beyond society's whispers, lies a bond too powerful to deny, a love that defies judgment and awakens truth. Every story here is told as it was lived, genuine, unfiltered, and deeply human. If you've ever felt the kind of love that changes everything, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join this journey where hearts speak louder than rules. The first time the eyes met, the world seemed to pause. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, not in that moment, not in that setting. It should have been simple, a glance, a polite acknowledgement, nothing more. But it wasn't. Something shifted, something stirred, and it felt dangerous from the very beginning. There was no reason for a heart to beat so fast over a glance, no logic behind the heat rising inside, but logic has never been strong enough to silence the truth of attraction. It came like a wave, unexpected and undeniable, sweeping away the carefully built walls of indifference that had been held up for years. It wasn't the kind of spark that screams loudly. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but powerful in its silence. The weight of that single moment pressed deep inside, awakening emotions that had long been buried under time, routine, and the steady rhythm of a life that had forgotten how to feel something new. For so long, emotions had been kept in control, desires muted, feelings pressed down until they barely breathed, and yet, with one look, all of it rushed back, like fire to dry wood, like a storm breaking into a drought. At first, it was easy to dismiss, just a coincidence, just a trick of the heart, just a moment that didn't mean more than it should. But the body never lies, and neither do the eyes. Every time they found each other again, even in passing, something inside shifted. It was subtle, hidden beneath polite words and careful distance, but it was there, alive and growing stronger each time. The air seemed heavier whenever he was near, charged with an energy that couldn't be explained, as though the universe itself was daring the heart to feel again. Danger lingered in that spark, and it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't only about attraction. It was about everything that came with it. The risk, the whispers of judgment, the lines that shouldn't be crossed. And maybe that was what made it burn even hotter. The forbidden has a way of making the heart beat louder, the breath quicker, the senses sharper. It was not a childlike crush, not something light and fleeting. It was deeper, older, heavier, a pull that carried both fear and longing, as if the soul itself recognized something it had been starving for. Every glance became a conversation, every brush of presence a confession. Words didn't matter. The silence spoke louder than anything that could have been said. Sometimes it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing one wrong step could change everything, yet feeling an almost irresistible urge to step forward anyway. There was safety in staying away, in pretending nothing was there, but there was no life in it. Life was in the spark, in the danger, in the fire that threatened to consume both caution and comfort. It wasn't just desire, it was recognition. A part of the heart hidden for years woke up that day. It felt seen, felt alive, felt wanted in a way that hadn't been felt in far too long. The eyes that met didn't just look, they understood, they pierced through layers, and they spoke to something beyond the surface. That was the most dangerous part. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about connection, about something real trying to break free. And so it began, quietly but unshakably, a moment of eye contact, a simple spark, yet it changed everything. There was no going back to indifference, no way to erase what had been awakened. Even when silence returned, even when distance tried to hold the line, the memory of that look stayed. echoing in the heart like a song that refused to end. It was the beginning of something both feared and longed for, something that promised both ruin and salvation. The first spark was dangerous, yes, but it was also undeniable. It carried the weight of everything that had been hidden, everything that had been waiting, everything that had been locked away, waiting for the right moment, the right eyes, the right soul. And from that single spark, the fire began to grow. Nothing would ever be the same again. It didn't happen all at once. That spark from the first glance was still there, humming quietly beneath the surface, but it grew slowly, carefully, hidden in the spaces where words couldn't reach. At first, it was nothing more than moments that seemed harmless. A smile held a second longer than necessary, a question asked with more care than expected, a presence that lingered close enough to feel without touching. Those small things felt innocent, but innocence has a way of bending into something deeper when the heart refuses to look away. The air between us changed. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden confessions, no reckless words. It was subtle, the kind of change only two people caught in its gravity could recognize. The brush of a hand reaching for the same object, the silence between conversations that stretched longer than it should, the way laughter softened into quiet stares that neither of us wanted to break. Each moment built on the last, adding weight to something unspoken, something that lived in the shadows but felt more real than anything in the light. Desire doesn't shout, it whispers, it creeps into the heart like smoke, curling around places that had been asleep for far too long. What began as closeness grew into something neither of us could name but both of us felt. The nearness of him stirred something that couldn't be denied, and every time he stood close, the pulse quickened, the breath shortened, and the fire that had started with one look grew warmer. It became impossible not to notice the way his eyes lingered, the way his voice softened when speaking, the way his body leaned in as though drawn without thought. Those weren't accidents. They were signs of something waiting beneath the surface, something neither of us had chosen, but both of us had surrendered to. In the stillness of shared space, the tension became louder than any sound. There were nights when the memory of his presence stayed long after he had gone, haunting in the best and worst ways. The warmth of his glance replayed over and over, and the thought of what it meant consumed the quiet hours. Each moment we shared was fuel, and the fire only grew. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, as though a part of the soul had found its mirror in him. And yet, beneath it all, desire was there, gentle, patient, insistent. The touches began without intention, fingers brushing against each other as if by mistake, a shoulder brushing against an arm, the kind of contact that could still be explained away but carried far more weight than it should. Those accidental touches were not accidents. They were invitations, silent admissions that words would have ruined. Each one left the skin burning, the body aching for more, but both of us held back, trapped between restraint and hunger. And then there were the glances, eyes meeting across a room, locking for just long enough to leave the heart racing. A glance can hold 1,000 words, and ours did. They spoke of longing, of fear, of restraint breaking apart little by little. Sometimes the world around us blurred, and it felt as if only those eyes existed, pulling me deeper, stripping away all pretense until nothing remained but truth. The fire grew in secret, hidden in the pauses, the silences, the spaces where no one else could see. It wasn't loud or reckless, but it was unstoppable. Every stolen moment added another layer, another reason to fall deeper, another truth that couldn't be ignored. The longing became unbearable, the desire too sharp to bury. It was no longer about choice. It was about surrender. The hunger to be near him grew stronger every day, and yet it wasn't just about the body. It was about the way he listened, the way he understood without needing explanation, the way he carried both strength and gentleness in the same breath. That combination was intoxicating, and it blurred every line that once felt unbreakable. There came a point where the silence between us said more than any words could. It wasn't just desire anymore, it was love woven into longing, intimacy wrapped in restraint, and a fire burning too fiercely to be hidden forever. What began as innocent closeness had become something deeper, something that could no longer be ignored. The quiet fire consumed everything. Every stolen moment was both a gift and a torment, every brush of his hand a promise, every glance a confession. It was dangerous, it was forbidden, but it was real. And in that truth, the desire became impossible to silence. It was no longer just fire. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. There is a moment when restraint becomes impossible, when the body and heart can no longer pretend they are untouched by longing. It was never planned, never something spoken aloud, but it lived in every glance, every silence, every brush of closeness that burned hotter with each passing day. Desire had been patient, waiting in the shadows, but patience has its limit. That night, all the unspoken truths broke free. The air was heavy with something unnameable, something that pressed closer than words could reach. There was nothing extraordinary about where it happened, no grand setting, no perfect arrangement, but the weight of that night was unforgettable. The stillness felt charged, like the air before a storm, and every heartbeat carried the knowledge that something irreversible was about to happen. Eyes met, and it was different. There was no glance to look away from, no polite distance to pretend anymore. It was raw, direct, undeniable. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, overflowing with everything that had been buried beneath restraint. The distance between us was fragile, thin, trembling, and when it broke completely. The first touch carried years of silence, years of denial, years of hunger that had been locked away. It wasn't clumsy or uncertain. It was desperate and tender at once, like two souls colliding after being starved of each other for too long. His hand found mine, and it was enough to unravel me. The warmth of his skin felt like fire, and in that instant, all hesitation disappeared. There was no going back. Every breath grew heavier. Every movement pulled us closer. Lips met and the world fell away. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a surrender, an admission of everything we had been hiding, everything we had been too afraid to say. It was soft, then hungry, then both at once, and it felt as if my entire body had been waiting for this one moment. The collision of tenderness and hunger was unlike anything I had ever known. It was passion, yes, but deeper than that. It wasn't just about the body. It was about recognition, about two people finding something in each other that had been missing from their souls. Every touch was electric. Every movement carried meaning. It wasn't rushed, yet it was unstoppable, as if time itself bent to make room for us. Clothes became less important than the heat of skin against skin. The world outside the room didn't exist. Nothing mattered except the closeness, the fire, the way he held me as though letting go would mean losing everything. Passion burned hot, but beneath it was something gentler, steadier, a tenderness that made the hunger even more consuming. He wasn't just touching my body, he was reaching into my soul, reminding me of everything I thought I had lost, everything I thought I would never feel again. There was no fear, no shame, only truth. Truth in the way our bodies moved together, in the way desire poured out like it had been waiting for years. It wasn't just lust, it was love written through every kiss, every sigh, every trembling breath. The hunger was raw, but it was also sacred, as though our passion was a prayer whispered against skin. Every second deepened the connection, carving it into memory, etching it into flesh. It was more than physical release. It was healing, awakening, becoming. It was the kind of love that consumes and frees at once, leaving nothing hidden, nothing untouched. His hands traced not just curves, but history, every scar, every wound, every place that had been starved of affection. And in return, I gave myself fully, without hesitation, without restraint. The night stretched, timeless and endless, and with each passing moment, it became clear that this was not just a crossing of a line. It was a crossing into something unshakable. Passion burned, but what lingered beneath it was even stronger. Devotion, connection, a love that went beyond flesh. The hunger may have drawn us together, but it was tenderness that made it unforgettable. When it was over, there was no regret. Only stillness, only the soft rhythm of two hearts that had finally spoken the same truth. His arms around me felt like home, and for the first time in so long, I felt whole. The night didn't destroy, it created, it revealed, it changed everything. One line had been crossed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after should have been heavy with guilt, with fear, with the weight of what had been done. At least that is what the world would have expected, but instead, the air carried a strange peace, a stillness that felt like truth finally resting in its rightful place. The body remembered the fire, the tenderness, the hunger, but what lingered most was not the passion, it was the connection. It was the way his presence settled into the soul, as if it had always belonged there. Desire fades quickly when it is only about the body, but this was different. Even after the first night, what clung to the heart was not the heat of skin, but the way his hand fit so perfectly into mine, the way his eyes searched with gentleness even in moments of abandon, the way his embrace felt less like possession and more like home. That night had not ended in silence or shame. It had ended with two people breathing together, as though their hearts had finally found the same rhythm. The bond was undeniable, and it terrified me, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt so right in a world that would never understand it. Society builds its rules, its judgments, its whispered condemnations, and yet love has never obeyed such boundaries. Love rises where it chooses, in the hearts it chooses, without asking permission. And when it came for us, it was not something that could be hidden behind polite restraint. It was a truth too strong to deny. Days passed, but the connection didn't weaken. If anything, it deepened. Every glance, every word, every touch carried more weight than before. What we had shared had broken something open inside both of us, and there was no way to close it again. The fire of desire had opened the door, but what walked through was something much greater. Devotion, care, an emotional bond that reached deeper than anything I had ever known. Being near him was no longer enough. It wasn't just the hunger for another night, though that hunger never left. It was the longing to know him in every way, to understand his fears, his dreams, the smallest details of who he was. Love changes desire. It takes what begins as fire and turns it into light that warms everything it touches. I found myself drawn not only to his body, but to his spirit, his heart, his soul, and I knew he felt the same. The danger of it all never disappeared. Every stolen moment risked being seen. Every smile carried the weight of secrecy. Every meeting could have ended in discovery. And yet, instead of fear tearing it apart, the risk only made the bond stronger. There was a strange kind of courage in the love we shared, the courage to hold each other even when the world would have called it wrong. Because in that space where only the two of us existed, nothing about it felt wrong. It felt pure. It became clear that what we had was not a passing temptation. It wasn't the thrill of secrecy or the intoxication of the forbidden. It was something steady, something that rooted itself deeper with every day that passed. The more time we shared, the more the truth revealed itself. This was not about rules or expectations, not about the opinions of others. This was about love, the kind that silences doubt, the kind that endures judgment, the kind that refuses to die. Every time he looked at me, there was no hesitation in his eyes, no question, only certainty. That certainty gave me strength, gave me faith in what we were building. Even if the world called it wrong, it was ours and it was real. I had lived long enough to know the difference between fleeting desire and lasting love, and what lived between us was not fleeting. It was unshakable. It was not easy. Love beyond the rules never is. There were moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments of wondering how long we could live in the shadows. But even in those moments, the bond never broke. The connection was stronger than the fear. Love has a way of quieting the noise of the world when it is true, and in the silence of our togetherness, the noise faded away. Sometimes in his arms, the thought would come that perhaps this was madness, that perhaps this was selfish, that perhaps we were stepping into something that would bring pain. But then he would touch my face with such tenderness, or whisper words that felt carved from his soul, and all the doubts would dissolve, because madness could never feel this much like peace. Selfishness could never feel this much like truth. The bond that began in stolen glances and deepened in passion had become something indestructible. It was not a game, not a mistake, not a fleeting chapter. It was love in its truest form, messy, complicated, dangerous, and yet beautiful, enduring, sacred. And once it had awakened, there was no returning to the life that existed before. What lingered after that night was not just the memory of desire, but the undeniable truth of love that refused to be caged by rules. A love that demanded to be felt, to be lived, to be honored, no matter the cost. And in the end, the truth was simple. The heart does not ask permission to love. It only knows when it has found its home. Love has no boundaries, no rules strong enough to silence it, no barriers that can hold it back when it is true. Every forbidden glance, every moment of desire, every line crossed, and every bond formed beyond judgment reminds us that love chooses us, not the other way around. If this story touched you, if it echoed somewhere deep inside your heart, then stay with us. Like, subscribe, and keep walking with us through stories that prove love is the most dangerous, yet the most beautiful truth we can ever live.